Hi, this is Terry from Bonsai Tree and welcome to today's instructional video that I plan to do, would like to do about Japanese black pines, which are of course your 2-needle pines. Very famous pine to be working with, very popular, of course made famous by the Japanese bonsai professionals for many centuries. And I've got 2 examples to work on today. And I'm going to probably first be just giving you an overview of the scope of work, the kind of work that we should be doing on our pines in autumn. In fact, I must confess it is actually the beginning of winter, so I'm a little bit late, but better late than never. And so I'll just describe the kind of work and why we need to do it now. A couple of things about tools that are useful to have. And then also perhaps just assessing the trees, and maybe I'll do that first, which will help you to identify faults and perhaps take corrective action in the growing season ahead. All right, so as I mentioned, I think we should first just do an assessment initially of the trees that are on the bench, which will give you a very good idea of the results of anything that you did do with the tree or on the tree in the previous growing season, and then also how you should respond and take what you should do, apply to the tree now to take it into the new growing season. If we just look at the tree, we just rotate it a couple of times. We just want to look at the overall strength of the tree. Strength of the tree is going to be exhibited, or you can see that by the length of the needles around the tree. If they are of a generally uniform length, then the energy is well balanced, and very much a lot of the work that you're doing with pines is geared towards energy balancing, or a balancing act of energy. This is the front of the tree, which would obviously make this the back of the tree. And I know for a fact that this customer has this tree positioned in such a way that the sunlight will only reaches the back of the tree. And although I have asked and suggested that they rotate the tree every few weeks, I can see that that has not been done. And the reason I can see that is because there are sections of the front of the tree that was largely shaded, or at least somewhat shaded, that has become weaker and has actually died. And you can see here, you've actually got a dead branch. And this area is generally weak. So I think that is a very good example of why you should rotate your trees every few weeks during the growing season to ensure that you get an overall exposure, or that the tree gets a good uniform and overall exposure to sunlight. Otherwise, you're going to get areas of the tree that will become progressively weaker. The other thing that I want to look at is the result, or the outcome of the decandling that would have been done in the previous season in summer. And yeah, we can see that we actually had 3 buds developing, and one of the things that we should be doing now is to eliminate one of them and keep only 2. And it's a good idea to do that in late autumn. So if you allow these 3 shoots or buds to remain, the problem is that in spring, when the candles extend, you're going to get a swelling at this point, and that's not going to look very nice. So one of the things that we need to do now is to remove one of these shoots and keep 2 of them, and then you can avoid that issue. And then the other thing that we want to look for is buds that have formed as a result of the tree being generally healthy and possibly being stimulated by decandling. But you've got these buds on either side of this branch, which is going to be very important for the future of this section of the tree, because as this becomes progressively thicker and coarser, eventually we're going to want to replace it. So it's always important to ensure that you create, or that you foster and nurture buds like these, to ensure that the tree doesn't just get progressively bigger and bigger, that you can maintain the tree at the same size by cutting back in the future to these buds. And then just looking at the tree again as to its overall health, the needles are a nice green color, and the green is the whole needle is green, so you don't have any discolored patches or banding, which would be indicative of a fungal attack. There will of course be some browning needles in the tree. Those are just old needles, possibly 3-year-old needles that have remained on the tree, and the tree is now shedding them, so that's nothing to be concerned about. And then you may have noticed some of these needles have a brown tip. They were cut, and they were probably cut when this tree was last worked, when needles were plucked, in an effort just to give the tree a neater appearance, and that the needles were more or less overall the same length. That, however, needle cutting is not a technique for getting shorter needles, of course. That has to do with your energy balancing that we mentioned earlier. This tree is generally healthy, but there are some problems with it, and so the work that I'm going to be doing on this tree in the next couple of days will be to needle pluck, and this is to reduce the amount of needles so that I can divert energy or that'll come out in spring to other areas of the tree that are weaker. So in the areas that are weaker, I would leave more needles, and the strong areas I would reduce the needles. How many pairs of needles in total does come down to a little bit of experience and luck mixed together, and the seasons obviously have to play into that as well. So I have to address the fact that there is some areas of weakness of this tree, and so I'll focus on trying to generate or direct more energy into that area. I will needle pluck the entire tree. Then I will sort through all the shoots that we have. In places where you've got more than 2, I would eliminate the 3rd one. Generally, when you do that, you would eliminate the in the bottom area of the tree, the lower parts of the tree, you would eliminate shoots that are growing from the bottom and from the top, and keep the side ones, horizontally growing buds or shoots, and then as you move further up into the apex of the tree, you would keep those that are growing in a more upward fashion. And then after thinning the shoots out, I'm going to wire the tree. Wiring will just help to position the growing tips that they all get their due sunlight, so that they can all develop evenly, and also just to give a better structure and positioning of the branches. Winter, of course, is a good time of the year to be wiring your pines, because that is when sap flow is at its lowest, and you're not going to remove the bark so easily when you do apply the wire. So now is a good time of the year to be doing the wiring, and generally there's not too much other tasks to do on other bonsai, so you should have the time to apply to your pines. Word about tools that you're going to need for these tasks. The most important ones, of course, are going to be a good pair of tweezers, and I would suggest that you buy tweezers that are specifically designed for needle plucking. I know it sounds a bit, does it really make a difference? But I will show you in a second on a close-up what the difference is between pine needle tweezers and a normal pair of tweezers. So aside from that, you're also going to need a good pair of trimming scissors, which has a very slender cutting tip or cutting point, and allows you to get in between the needles and cutting out buds very easily. And then for that, you will find that sap will build up, pine sap resin will build up very quickly on the blades, and so you're going to need a cremate block to remove that sap, because that build up residue can damage your tools. And then also I use a pair of, you can use a steel brush, or preferably a steel brush or a brass brush, but the steel brush works better for cleaning the sap that will accumulate on the teeth of your tweezers. And then also I would really recommend that you use the DMT sharpening files for keeping your trimming scissors as sharp as possible. A clean cut is a cut that heals that much faster. This is a pair of Kikuwa made pine plucking tweezers, and as you can see, this area here has been raised so that when you pinch, you grab hold of the needle, that the rest of the needle will sit in this area. So when you pull to pluck it off, it doesn't slide off. After plucking needles for a while, you'll see that the teeth of the tweezers will accumulate resin, and the needles will just tend to slide out when you try and pluck. So it's a good idea to use a lighter and burn the resin, and then you can just use a brush, a wire brush, to remove the burnt or the carbonized resin from the teeth, and then it has a better grip again. Yeah, you can see on my scissors, as I've been working with the pines for a while now, a resin has started to build up here. So quickly take your cremate block and use it almost like an eraser and quickly remove that. My cremate block has been used a lot, and so there is a oil residue in the block. If yours is new or relatively new, then I would encourage you to first put a little bit of jojoba oil, is the one that we use, onto the block. It just makes it work that much better. Ideally, don't use synthetic oil, machine oil or something, because that will come into contact with bare or live tissue of the plant, and I'm not really sure of what the outcome of that would be. Before I start working on a tree, I like to just hone the edge of the blade of the scissors, and the DMT series comes in 3 levels of coarseness or fineness. This one, if you get into the habit of sharpening your tools quite frequently, then you can go to the ultra fine, which is the green one, immediately. You don't need to use the coarser blades, and but if you've chipped a blade or you've neglected to sharpen the tools for a while, then maybe using the medium and then going down to the fine. So just a few strokes of the sharpening file is enough to give the edge of the scissors a good sharp cutting edge once again. Show you another tree that I started working on already, and just describe the work that I've done and why I've done it. Also a Japanese black pine, 2-needle pine, and so far I've been thinning the buds and needle plucking. So you can it's obvious, it should be obvious to you if you look at this side of the tree, that this side has already been completed and this side still needs to be worked. So this is the way it looked before I removed needles, as I have it done on this side. Now I know, because I have a history with this tree, I know that it's a very strong grower, it's a very healthy pine, and as you can see, it's given me a really good dense growth. But the problem with this dense growth is if I don't thin it out, it's not going to allow enough sunlight into the tree to keep those little back buds that I referred to earlier alive. They're going to get weaker and die. So part of the benefit of doing the needle plucking is to stimulate those buds on the interior of the tree. So in this area you can see to the extent that needles have been removed. And in the apical area of the tree, because that is a section or part of the tree that gets the most sunlight and is just genetically stronger than any other area of the tree, you can afford to remove more needles there. So at this point I've got about 5 pairs of needles, so that gives me 10 needles in total. And then in the lower areas of the tree, where it tends to be a little bit more shaded, a little bit weaker, especially on drooping branches, I've left a few more pairs of needles just so that I can pull a little bit more sap into that part of the tree than is inclined to go to this area, and in that way hopefully achieve better energy balance between the bottom and the top of the tree. Alright, so yeah, we have an interesting area of this branch where you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 buds. So this is a particularly strong area of the tree. So we can't keep all of these buds, and we're going to have to eliminate some of them. So I would take, considering where this is on the tree, the most obvious one that needs to be removed is going to be the top. So the top shoot, because that's growing straight up. And so we're just going to use the tip. That's why I said trimming scissors is very useful, because it allows you you're working right at the tip of the scissors. Okay, so we can cut that out. So now we've still got 3 buds. Now we need to decide which 3 we're going to keep. And I think I'm going to remove this bottom growing one. There is a little bit of there is an energy difference between this one and this one. Not ideal, but I prefer that because the buds are laying horizontal and opposite to one another, so they'd be coming out of the end of this branchlet in a more pleasing sort of angle and easier to work with. So I'm going to remove that bottom bud as well. Okay, so we've thinned out now the buds that we don't want, and now we're going to take our tweezers and we're going to grip onto the needle. And now you pull in the direction in which the needle lays. Now it's not, it's going to take you a long time to do a tree of this size and this degree of ramification if you're going to take one needle and then sort of throw it off to one side, and another needle and throw it off to one side, because they do tend to stick to the tweezers a little bit, especially if the tweezers are dirty. But the best way to do is just to pull and release, and this speeds up the whole process. So what we're trying to do is we're eliminating all the needles that we don't want, that are sitting on basically in the areas where those other buds were growing, so on the main branchlet. And we want to remove those needles first, okay? And at the junction as well, there's a needle there that can be removed. And now we start getting, you can also see sometimes a slight difference in the color. So the needles, the older needles, have a more drab green, slightly different, but your eyes do get used to it. And then you've got a brighter, more emerald green on the newer, more vital needles. So now we've removed all the old needles, and now we need to start reducing the needles on the bud as well. So we look and we see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pairs of 6 so 12 needles, so 6 pairs of needles, and this one is going to be considerably more. So this one's definitely going to go stronger if we don't reduce it, and if we've decided we are going to sit with 6 pairs of needles in this area or this zone of the tree, then that is perfect for what it is. We don't need to remove any more needles here, but we will definitely need to remove some needles from this side. So working from the back towards the front, in other words, at the beginning of, well, this is the back of that shoot, and we remove needles from the back moving towards the front. And so we can obviously see that there's too many, so we can immediately reduce some of them, and then we can count. Now I know it sounds absurd counting, but actually your eyes get used to it after a while, and you'll eventually see, you'll just recognize how many needles are there when you do it enough. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we've got 2 too many still. So we take the last 2 out, and now we should have 6. And that's done. So that shoot is done. Now we move over to the next one. We do the same thing. Now there's a very weak shoot at this point, so we can cut that one out. Now, and then we've got another one developing in this area. That one is also very weak, so we'll remove that. Now these ones are not ideally placed, but we can, just through twisting the wire, change the orientation of those buds, because you do want to get them flat. And there they are, better positioned. Now we do the needle plucking again. Firstly, we can clearly see these are old needles, so we can remove those first without even counting them. And then we can see that's definitely too many. That's a lot more than 6 pairs of needles. So we just reduce it a little bit, and then we can do our count. Okay, 6 pairs of needles. Then we go to the next one, pluck these out, and as you can see, I'm plucking from the back, moving towards the front, and I'm plucking the needles in the direction in which they lay. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so we can take another 2 out. And I try to also remove needles sort of uniformly around the bud, so not everything on the one side and leave everything on the other side. And in this way, when you do, this is now going to be the bud that will develop in spring, from which your spring needles will develop on those candles. And if you're decandling, then you will be cutting that candle out again. So it's important that you have needles all around that tip, so that you can ensure that you're going to get buds happening on not just on one side, because you do want to ideally get 2. But decandling is a subject for another video. I just want to comment on wire and wire bite. As you can see, this tree would have been wired last year, and probably in winter, so a year ago. And you can see there is wire starting to bite in at this area. Now in the past, before I knew any better, I would have seen a little bit of wire bite, and I would have then come in and cut all this wire off from the tree, or removed it in whatever manner. But as you know, pines tend to spring back, so you don't want to remove all the wire. You just want to remove the wire that is biting in, that's actually creating a problem. And the rest of the wire you can leave on the tree until such time that it starts to bite in. Because if you take the wire off prematurely, all that time that you spent on applying the wire is just going to be for nothing. So cut off or remove the wire that is biting in, but leave the wire that is not. And this is also your wiring technique, and how tightly you apply the wire also will determine how soon you need to remove the wire from the tree. Okay, so I'm going to remove this section of wire, and I'm going to do so by cutting off what I can, and then using a pair of pliers, I'm going to, where it is biting in, just gently lift it out, and trying not to interfere with the camera angle or damage the branch either. This is copper wire, so it is a little bit more difficult to work with, especially I'm right-handed and I'm now working left-handed. But that was the area that was of concern. So we just want to remove the wire which is causing a problem. We don't want to go further than that. So that was the section that was a problem. So we've eliminated that, and now we can just cut this wire, and that's as far as we need to go. There's no problems further back, and that's sorted out. That wire bite won't get any worse. A little bit of wire bite is not too much of a problem, especially on younger trees, but you certainly don't want the wire to start disappearing into the branches, because that is a problem. But what I wanted to also mention just at the moment before I forget is that a lot of the techniques that I've described now are for trees that are in refinement. These are pines that have been grown for a number of years. So the structural branches have been set and you're building up ramification. This is when you really start with the decandling process and energy balancing. Up until then, it's not really, while you're developing girth of the trunk, or if you're developing the thickness or the girth or the length of primary branches, a lot of these techniques are not going to apply, or they're going to apply in a different way or a different manner than the way that I've described them. So don't apply these techniques just blindly to your pines. Understand what the purpose of these techniques are, and when they are to be appropriately applied to your trees. And yeah, above all else, enjoy your pines. I love them.